I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. On this program, we feature leading newsmakers and the New York Times journalists who cover them. This week, U.S. intelligence expert Tim Weiner joins us. We'll discuss a concept that's central to Donald Trump's appeal among many Americans. What is the deep state? My first guest is a Times columnist known for his work in human rights, social justice, and global affairs. He's helped reshape opinion journalism over several decades of award-winning reporting. New York Times op-ed columnist and best-selling author Nick Kristof has another book coming out this spring titled Chasing Hope, A Reporter's Life. It's a book I'm looking forward to. Nick, some people might say you were chasing rainbows, but in fact, you've often found them. And the list of nonprofits you listed around Christmas time has already raised more than $6 million. So obviously, you've done a lot of good in your column and you've seen a lot of good. But, you know, I've been telling people, Happy New Year. This year, it's got to be better than last. Last year wasn't that great. But you said in some ways, 2023 may still have been the best year in the history of humanity. How do you figure that?
So, Sam, you know, I think that many of us would say that the very worst thing that can happen to a person is to lose a child. And historically, that was very common. Almost half of people around the world died as children until about midway through the 19th century. And then there's been this plunge in child mortality. And it seems, the data is provisional, but it seems that actually last year we reached a new low in the share of children dying before the age of 5, 3.6%. And obviously that's still way too many people dying unnecessarily, but that's 1 million fewer kids than were dying each year as recently as 2016. And likewise, if you look at the share of people living in extreme poverty, that, you know, when I graduated from college, 41% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. It, again, appears to have reached a new low in 2023 of 8%. And so there was so much wrong with the world, so much we need to fix, but I think it's also useful for us to acknowledge this backdrop of progress. And, you know, in the news business, we cover planes that crash, not planes that land, but periodically we should step back and acknowledge there are a lot of planes landing too.
And you also have pointed out that when we cover tragedy, when we cover bad news relentlessly, it causes people to sort of give up and to lose hope. So how do you find, as you always have, the hopeful stories?
People always ask how it is that a reporter covering, you know, war and genocide and global poverty and disease manages to sort of feel, you know, vaguely optimistic. And I think it's two reasons. I mean, one, in the period of my career, I really have seen this enormous progress, especially in the developing world. And secondly, and, you know, I think this will resonate with you too, Sam, that side by side with the worst of humanity, you tend to encounter the best. And, you know, I remember one time covering the mass atrocities in the Congo, in the DRC Congo, and it was horrific. There was mass killing, mass rape, starvation, and there was a warlord who represented just the worst of humanity. And then there was this little Polish nun who was there, stayed there when all the aid workers had fled. She was single-handedly trying to help all these children in the area. And, you know, it just sort of underscored to me how people truly are capable of incredible decency, magnanimity, courage, resilience, strength when they are tested. And that I've seen.
In recent columns in the Times, you've raised two sort of red flags looking forward to 2024. One, Taiwan, which you visited, and also North Korea, saying that these two could be very big trouble spots in the year ahead. How serious a problem is that?
So basically, the answer is we really don't know with either. And I think we need to approach both with a certain amount of humility. You know, in the case of China and Taiwan, the degree of risk really depends on President Xi Jinping of China. And he's going to determine largely whether there's conflict. I tend to think that the risk of conflict is overstated, and I worry, frankly, that Americans, the anxiety in the US about the risk of a conflict with China can actually create the seeds of that conflict and risk a confrontation, an accident that escalates. But there is certainly some genuine risk there, and in the case of North Korea, something strange is going on in North Korea, and the government there in the last few years the rhetoric has changed, their policies have changed, they pulled inward, they seem to have given up to some degree on diplomacy. And two veteran analysts of North Korea, including Bob Carlin, who is pretty much kind of the gold standard he worked for 50 years with the CIA, with the State Department, with other organizations, and he warns that he thinks North Korea has actually made a strategic decision to launch a surprise attack. And, boy, I don't know if I agree or not, but he deserves to be heard. And we need to watch the Korean Peninsula, I think, very carefully this year.
What would be the upside for North Korea?
So we don't really know. And I think that's the best argument why it wouldn't happen. It's hard to see, how they could gain. There is an argument that, they are not getting attention. They're not getting anything these days. And if they just want to throw all the cards up in the air and kind of see where they land, that maybe they'll, that may be useful to them, or that they may, historically, North Korea has been quite prone to brinksmanship and quite willing to step up very, very close to the lines of war. And so one can imagine them initiating something, not expecting a full-scale response, and they might miscalculate, as we've periodically seen countries do.
Nick, you've written about the atrocities committed by Hamas, and you've written about the suffering of the people in Gaza. How do we reconcile those two things with all those competing agendas and the fact that this has been going on for decades or, arguably hundreds or thousands of years?
Sam, I think a starting point simply has to be that, I think we tend to think of international conflicts as right versus wrong. I think a starting point is that both sides have a certain amount of right here. Israelis did not deserve to be attacked and endure massacres and rape and mutilation in October. And likewise, Gazans, half of whom are children, do not deserve to suffer mass bombardment, destruction of their homes. It's on the edge of starvation. I spoke to a doctor, a surgeon in Gaza, and the stories he was telling of amputations of children just break my heart. And I think there are too many people who, they look at one side or at the other and say, this is outrageous, and then they excuse one side by, with a lot of buts, but this, but that. And at the end of the day, if your heart doesn't bleed both for Israelis who were killed on October 7th and for Palestinians who have been killed in vast numbers ever since, then you've got a heart problem. There's no hierarchy of human life. Lives on both sides are valuable, and it troubles me in particular that my tax dollars are going to buy 2,000-pound bombs that are being dropped on civilians in Gaza.
You've written a number of times, and certainly the Times has, with apocalyptic visions of what will happen to the United States, what will happen to democracy if Donald Trump gets elected next November. How worried should we really be?
Pretty worried. Pretty worried. The betting markets now show Donald Trump more likely to win in November than Joe Biden. And I take those betting markets pretty seriously. I mean, I think it's very hard to calibrate that risk, but there's certainly a real possibility. And look, I mean, I'm not going to be sent off to Guantanamo, but we've seen in And in my career, I've covered plenty of places like Hungary or like Poland before, where democracy is whittled away, where there is more political violence, where it then becomes harder to convict people of crimes of political violence because in a jury there's going to be somebody who is going to vote, against conviction, leading to a decay of the political system, a decline of democracy, and a bleaker future for the entire country. Could that happen here? Absolutely. And I think it is going to be incumbent on us this year to not just cover the horse race and, the he said, she said, but to try to the best we can, convey to the public some of the stakes. And, we have a candidate who, it seems to me, is running not just in a democracy, but in some ways against democracy.
Nick Kristof of the New York Times. I, for one, looking forward to his book coming out in a few months, Chasing Hope, A Reporter's Life. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next, Donald Trump and the deep state. To the dismay of some people watching this year's Republican primary race, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be interested in tempering his rhetoric. Central to his message has been a call of retribution against the deep state. National security expert, award-winning author, and former New York Times journalist Tim Weiner is here to shed some light on what more than a third of Americans believe to be true. Tim, is there such a thing as the deep state?
Nope.
So what are people so worried about or talk about, or why do they look upon this as something to be afraid of?
The fear of a deep state is based on the idea that there is a secret cabal of unelected military and intelligence officials and their puppets who are really running the government. Not the president, not the Congress, not the judiciary. And this is a paranoid fantasy that has, like all big lies, a kernel of truth. The best big lie is built around a grain of truth to make it more believable. You and I are old enough to remember the days when J. Edgar Hoover ran rampant. Hoover ran the FBI for 48 years until he died in 1972. And here was an unelected official who was feared, who ruled by fear, and who had the ability to destroy lives, institutions, who tried to harass Martin Luther King into suicide. And if there ever were someone who represented the power of the imaginary deep state, it would be Hoover. Okay. Well, he's now been dead for lo these many years, going on 52 years. Nevertheless, on the right and on the left, on the fringes of both, people believe in a conspiratorial cabal that really runs the show in this country.
So if people are worried, or some people are worried about Donald Trump and his impact on democracy, could you make an argument that the deep state, or whatever they think of as the deep state, would actually prevent him from doing any of that? That if you talk about the military, the intelligence agencies, even Congress or the Supreme Court, however we define a deep state, they would rein him in because there is something even bigger than the presidency?
Sam, instead of sort of speculating about what might happen in the future, let's look with an intensity at what has happened and what Trump has done and what Trump has said. At the time of his election, all right, Trump was confronted about 3 weeks before he took office with reporting from CIA and FBI, and the heads of those two agencies went to brief him when he was president-elect, showing that Vladimir Putin and his Russian intelligence services had worked to defeat Clinton and elect Trump because they, the Russians, thought it was in their interest. Well, Trump didn't want to hear that. And so he began to libel the FBI and the CIA as Nazis and stormtroopers and as the instrumentalities of a deep state. Okay. His love for the CIA and the FBI did not increase during his time in office. Although as he began to learn what the CIA could do for him, he granted it some grudging respect. But what he wants from these agencies is loyalty to him, not to the Constitution, not to the country, not
And
to
not to the
American
institution of the presidency.
people, to him. Jim Comey, the head of the FBI until Trump dismissed him, describes a scene where the two of them are having dinner, just like you and I are sitting here in the White House, and Trump says to him, all I want is loyalty. All I ask is from you loyalty. And Comey thinks, it's like I'm talking to Sammy the Bull Gravano, you know, the mafia hitman. All I want is loyalty. So in his last days in office, right before the January 6th insurrection, Trump tried to put loyalists who weren't more qualified to run the CIA than I am to build a rocket ship to the moon in charge. He was going to put one of his more, how can I put this, unusual MAGA acolytes, a guy named Kash with a K Patel. He was scheming to make him the head of the CIA. He was going to make him the deputy director and then force the director, Gina Haspel, to quit. Well, Haspel, went to the White House and said, if you even contemplate doing this, I will resign and everybody around me will resign and we'll go public. Trump had enough trouble on his hands trying to organize an insurrection to overturn the election, so he didn't need that. But he tried, in his last days as president, to put loyalists, loyal to him only, in charge of the Pentagon, in charge of the FBI, and in charge of the CIA. And he would do it again. And he would use those agencies to preserve and protect and defend and extend his power.
So are you saying we shouldn't be that worried because institutionally and also because there are good people around that won't happen or it can't happen, or what?
Sam, I'm an optimist. I live in hope. I believe in the human race, and I think we should be extremely frightened about the prospect of what Trump would do in power if he is returned to the White House. Let's talk about the CIA, which is the institution I've covered for most of the last 40 years. The rules and regulations surrounding what a president can do with the CIA, okay, are executive orders, okay? They're not laws. They're written by presidents and they can be rewritten or ripped up or completely abrogated by presidents, okay? Trump's lawyers have argued in court around the issue of his immunity from prosecution for acts he committed as president and after he was president as being absolute. His lawyer said in court, addressing a hypothetical issue, the president could order the assassination of a political rival and he could not be prosecuted for it. Well, this reflects Trump's thinking. Famously, he said he could shoot somebody out here on Fifth Avenue, where we are sitting right now, and no one could prosecute him for it. The CIA, by its charter, cannot spy on Americans. Okay, Trump could abrogate that in an attempt to corrupt the institution and bend it to his will. There's a ban on assassinations, but it doesn't define what assassination is, okay? Everyone presumes, well, you can't knock off another head of state, like Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy wanted the CIA to kill Fidel Castro. Don't do that. But it means what a president wants it to mean. And we have seen enough of Trump in recent years to know that he would, without any doubt, partially succeed in trying to corrupt these institutions.
Tim, you have written a lot of best-selling books, Pulitzer Prize winner, Enemies: A History, the FBI, Legacy of Ashes, about the CIA. Why do these intelligence people, these spies, these secret agents, why do they talk to you?
Well, Sam, you've been a reporter for probably going on half a century. I'm pushing 40 years. Everybody likes to talk, right? They talk to me, I think, because they believe, having read what I've written, that I understand how the CIA works, that I am not a purveyor of conspiracy theories or paranoid fantasies, that I write nonfiction, and they can trust me. A reporter's work is built on trust, as is an intelligence officer's work. If these guys at the CIA, if they start lying to each other, they're dead, okay? It's an institution built on trust. And in fact, what an intelligence officer does overseas is not that different from what a reporter or foreign correspondent does overseas. We can parachute into strange places and say, take me to your leader. And 9 times out of 10, we will get to talk to the leader.
Tell me, I hesitate to ask this question, but are we safer today as a country, as Americans, than we were before 9/11?
Well, if you're talking about the threat of jihadists like Osama bin Laden, the CIA and the United States military has killed or captured the leadership of Al-Qaeda. So there was a tactical victory over Al-Qaeda. Strategic victory is elusive because think of Al-Qaeda as a blob of mercury sitting out there in Afghanistan 20 years ago. Bam! We hit it and tiny blobs of mercury spread all over the world. So we killed the leadership, but we did not kill the ideology, okay? And the ideology, as any intelligence officer worth his or her salt will tell you, is not simply kill all the Americans, let God sort them out, but it is based on hopelessness, on powerlessness. Terrorism is the weapon of the weak. And so the root causes of terrorism aimed at Americans have not been eradicated, and that is a job beyond the CIA and the military's power.
You've seen our intelligence agencies operate up close. Is there any privacy anymore? Do we have anything that we can keep private, or can we just assume everything between the web and Google and Amazon and corporate intelligence and artificial intelligence and the intelligence agencies know everything about us?
What a quaint notion, Sam, privacy.
That's right.
The CIA is forbidden to spy on Americans unless they are Americans overseas who are working with foreign powers. So the CIA is not reading your email, but the FBI can. And sometimes the FBI and even the National Security Agency, which is the electronic eavesdropping intelligence service, has the power to read the metadata, that is where you are sending your email from, perhaps a telephone number associated with it. Americans' civil rights and their right to privacy were significantly eroded early on in the Bush administration after 9/11, and the tension that always exists, Sam, between security and liberty. That's a tug of war that goes on. It's gone on since the beginning of the United States. Security won that tug of war for many, many years, and it's going to take probably another 10 or 20 years to get it back in equilibrium between national security and civil liberties. It's an ongoing struggle. It will never cease.
Tim Weiner, Pulitzer Prize winner, best-selling author, former correspondent for the New York Times. Thank you for joining us. Coming up next, I'll share some personal thoughts on a big birthday. On March 31st, 1624, 400 years ago next month, a ship left from the Netherlands with the first Dutch and Walloon immigrants to North America. The ship was called the New Netherland. It carried 30 families, some of whom would settle on what is now Governor's Island, others upstate. We can debate when to celebrate or commemorate the city's 400th birthday, but at some point we ought to candidly reflect on what's happened since that ship arrived, its impact on the people who were already here for some 8,000 years, and what the settlers and their progeny did right since then, what we wish they could do over, and what lessons we might learn for the future. A lot has changed in 4 centuries. Human nature, for the most part, has not. In 1625, some of those settlers moved to what is now Manhattan. A year later, Peter Minuit thought he had bought the island from the Lenape tribe. Pretty good deal for both, since the Lenape didn't really own it. That mythical $24 would be worth about $890 today. That's still a bargain. The city flag and seal used to be emblazoned with the year 1664. That's when the English took over and renamed the city New York. In 1977, City Council President Paul O'Dwyer got his Irish up about anything English. The flag and seal were changed from 1664 to more or less arbitrarily 1625. O'Dwyer was right about our roots, though. New York is unique among the American colonies because of our Dutch heritage. Those settlers from the Netherlands didn't come here to escape religious persecution. They did not come to proselytize. They came to make money. And if you didn't get in their way, you could pretty much go about your own business. Now, an idealist would call it tolerance. A cynic might describe it as indifference. However you characterize it, the resulting diversity defined New York to the rest of America. It defined America to the rest of the world. And despite our ambivalence over migrants or any newcomers for that matter, it still does. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.